It feels good to be in Michigan, and I'm so jealous of the mountains here. It's beautiful. I can claim it. I was born in Steamboat Springs, even though I was there for like a year of my life. But I still claim it a little bit. So it's good to be here. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited about tonight's event. It's going to be wonderful, and you're going to hear from some really incredible speakers. So you're in the right place. I first wanted to thank each of our panelists for being here tonight. They, like I said, they're just incredible, and I know that you're going to be blessed by what they have to say. And we'll all stick around after for questions and things like that as well. My name is Heather Bodwin, and I lead the Equal Justice USA Evangelical Network, and we're proud to be one of the sponsors for tonight's event. Equal Justice USA is a national organization that works to transform the justice system by promoting responses to violence that break cycles of trauma. We work at the intersection of criminal justice, public health, and racial justice to elevate healing over retribution, meet the needs of survivors, advance racial equity, and build community safety. And our Evangelical Network provides a space for people of faith to engage in all sorts of justice issues. The death penalty is one of our main ones. We work closely with evangelical leaders across the country to push toward a justice system that centers on redemption and healing. Tonight's event is also, of course, sponsored by Denver Seminary, and we're extremely grateful for the seminary for being such a wonderful host, and especially to Patty Pell and Andrea Wayand. Did I say your last name right, Andrea? Okay. Thank you for your help in making this happen. It would not have been possible without you, and we're really grateful. Also wanted to thank the Christian Community Development Association. They're also a sponsor of tonight's event, and this is their Locked in Solidarity Week, which is a week where they lift up criminal justice issues, and this year they're focusing on the death penalty and police violence. So we're glad to be able to partner with them for this event. Also wanted to just point out, many of you know that there is an active death penalty repeal bill here in your state, and so far it has passed out of the Senate, so we're glad for that, and the House hearing is scheduled for February 18th. So we're really glad to be able to have a conversation here right now as this is happening here in Colorado. Tonight we're going to hear from 3 incredible panelists who will share their own powerful stories and personal perspectives on the death penalty. And afterward, we'll have time for question and answers from the podium, and then we'll also hang out back at the table for other conversation as well. So please do engage in that. So I'm going to introduce each of our panelists right now and tell you a little about them, and then they'll just come up one at a time and share. So first to the podium will be Ray Crone. Along with Sister Helen Prejean from Dead Man Walking, Ray co-founded Witness to Innocence, the nation's only organization dedicated to empowering exonerated death row survivors. We're honored to have Ray with us tonight to share his story. Next, we will have Charlotta Evans, and she hails from Aurora. She is the founder of 5280 Survivors, which gives victims' families a sense of belonging and the ability to turn their pain into possibilities. So she'll share her story as well. And the last person to present this evening will be Shane Claiborne. Shane is a prominent speaker, activist, and best-selling author, and he has one of his books back at the table, which is called Executing Grace, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a really wonderful book about the death penalty. He founded The Simple Way in Philadelphia and leads Red Letter Christians. He also, as I have in my notes, he also recently wrote Executing Grace, How the Death Penalty Killed Jesus and Why It's Killing Us. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. We can give a round of applause. And Ray, I will turn it over to you.
Death row. Whew, that's bad. That's bad. How do you end up in death row? I'm going to tell you my story. Since I've gotten out, I've met a lot of people who've been on death row, and the stories are just horrible. But I'm going to start out just with a little background about me. I'm from a small agriculture town in south central Pennsylvania. One of them small towns where the day you're born, you already have a reputation based on your family's last name. Everybody knew everybody. I went to the same church. I went to the same high school my grandparents went to, the same church my great-grandparents went to. When I graduated in '74, I entered the U.S. Air Force. I got stationed places like Texas, Mississippi, Georgia, Maine, Arizona. I got out of 6 years active duty, stayed in Arizona, became a mailman. Life was good. And it was December 29th, a Sunday morning, 1991. The owner of a local bar came in and opened up his establishment, found his night manager stabbed to death in the men's bathroom. All she had on was her socks. And of course, the police were called, and they initiated an investigation under the assumption it had to be somebody that knew her. There was no evidence of a robbery, no sign of a break-in. Began questioning co-workers, and one of them said that she liked a guy named Ray Crone. My house was just down the street, a few blocks, and I was actually sitting inside. My dog was outside, and he started barking. I got up, I looked out the window, and there was two men in suits getting out of a car parked in front of my neighbor's house. And I walked out to let my dog in, and these two men were walking up my driveway. I said, "Excuse me, can I help you?" One man said, "Are you Ray Crone?" I said, "Yes, I am. What can I do for you?" He said, "Do you know Kim and Kona?" I said, thought a minute. I said, "No, I don't think I know anybody named Kim and Kona." He changed glances with the man next to him, looked back. He said, "You don't know Kim and Kona from the CBS Lounge?" I said, "Well, wait a minute. I play darts for that bar. I play volleyball there. There's a girl that works there named Kim." I said, "I don't know her last name." He said, "You don't know her last name? You're her boyfriend, aren't you?" I said, "No, I'm not her boyfriend. What's going on here?" He said, "You're dating her, aren't you?" I said, "No, I'm not dating her. What is this about?" And that's when he opened up his jacket, pulled out his badge, introduced himself as a homicide detective in Phoenix Police Department, informed me of Kim's murder, and said he was there to ask me a few questions. I was stunned. I was shocked to hear somebody I known. I've been going to the bar for a few months. Somebody I know was a murder victim, and the police are there to ask me questions. I said, "Sure, come on inside." They said, "No, we need to do this downtown." They grilled me for 3 hours about how long we've been dating, where we go on dates, how many times she was over at my house. At one point, they took my sneakers. Another point, they had me take my shirt off, took pictures of my upper torso, checked out my hands. They took fingerprints. They took mug shots. At one point, they even had this piece of styrofoam, kind of like those white insulated coffee cups, had me bite into this. I didn't know what was going on. There was nothing in the news. They weren't telling me anything. They were just asking me questions. And I cooperated. I had no reason not to. After 3 hours, I was taken home. I thought that was the end of it. Next day, it was a Monday. I had to work at the post office. When I got home, there was a detective waiting for me. He said, "You want to cooperate, don't you, Mr. Crone?" I said, "Of course." He said, "Well, I don't think you've been completely truthful. I need you to come downtown with me for a little bit. Eliminate you as a suspect." And so I said, "Well, sure." Well, when I got down there to the interrogation room this time, he slammed the door and he pulled out a piece of paper and said, "I got a search warrant here, and you're going to give me a hair sample, a blood sample, and a cast of your teeth." Now I'm a little shocked. I'm a little stunned. I'm a little angry. I'm a little concerned. Might even be a little frightened. I was 35 years old, and this man shows me a search warrant. I read through it, and it said I was required to do this. They had 3 hours, and it was signed by a judge. So I cooperated. I cooperated when he took blood out of both arms. I'm not sure what he was expecting to find. It was going to be the same. I cooperated when they took hair samples. They don't take hair samples with scissors. They pull it out by the roots from all over different parts of your body. Put in a little brown envelope. I cooperated through that. And they took me next door in the bigger room. They had a dentist chair in there. I had a dentist. Sat me in there, had these metal casts. They filled up with goop. Took 2 casts in my upper, 2 casts in my lower. Put this apparatus in my mouth, had my lips spread back where they could see my teeth, taking pictures, and all the time telling me to snarl and grin. And little background, when I was 18 years old, I was a passenger in a head-on collision. Woke up in the hospital with a broken jaw, my mouth wired shut. 6 weeks went by. The bottom didn't match the top. They just rewired it shut for another 6 weeks after re-breaking it. After 12 weeks, some of the teeth had died. I had to end up with some root canals, some implants. Well, they were actually bridge work, but I was always careful with my teeth, let's just say, and I wasn't biting in the corner of the cob and apples, and here they were in my mouth for about 2.5 hours. Finally, when I was done, I was taken back over in that little interrogation room. I went to sit down, and this detective bangs his logbook down on the table. Said, "Look, it's time to come clean. It's time to confess. I know you did it. Why don't you just give up?" Well, by now, I'm a little upset. I'm a little angry. My honor, my honesty, I was something I was proud of. Something certainly the U.S. Air Force recognized. I had a top secret clearance for the job that I did. Certainly, the U.S. Postal Service recognized my honor, my integrity for being a letter carrier, a mailman walking in and out of people's homes, property. And here's a man that doesn't even know me, called me a murderer and a rapist, tells me to confess. I got up in his face. I told him what I thought of him, what I thought of the police department, the investigation. I said, "Why are you wasting my time? Go find the person that did it. And by the way, your 3 hours are up." I was mad. I was ready to fight. He looked at me. He looked at his watch. He looked back up. He said, "Look, Mr. Crone, I'm not going to argue with you. There's other ways to handle this." He took me home. Again, I thought that was the end of it. It was the next day, December 31st, 1991, New Year's Eve, when I pulled into my driveway after work that day, just stepped out of my car, and then I heard this sound of brakes squealing, doors slamming, a megaphone yelling out, "Freeze, don't move, you're under arrest, put your hands in the air." I look over, it's a van load of police officers, full riot gear, guns drawn, threw me on the ground and arrested me for murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault in Kim's death. I was taken to the Maricopa County Jail. That's Phoenix, Arizona. It's probably about the 5th or 6th largest in the country. 4 o'clock New Year's Eve. I've never been to jail before. I don't even watch it on television. I knew right away I was around a whole lot of people I was not going to like. But I'm thinking, I'll be out of here any minute. They're continuing their investigation, find out I didn't do anything. I was home in bed. I have a roommate that knows that. I'll be out here any minute. And then it was days, and then it was weeks. And then it was months. I got a court-appointed attorney. Man was granted $5,000 by the judge to defend me. $5,000 to represent me in a capital murder case. You can't even get a divorce for $5,000. I got exactly what they paid him for, nothing. Just 7 months from the time they found the body, from the time they arrested me, I'm sitting in the courtroom on trial. Now I found out why they had me bite that styrofoam, why they had me that dentist there. Because their expert testimony was by a forensic odontologist, a bite mark expert who testified marks on the body matched my teeth, that my teeth were unique as a result of that car accident, that those marks on her body happened at the time of death, and that made me, Ray Crone, the murderer. The media loved it. They called me the snaggletooth killer. In just a 3-day trial, very little done by my attorney. I actually did take the stand myself from my defense. I answered my attorney's questions. Here come the prosecutor up to cross-examine me. So you deny killing Kim and Coda? Yes, I do. You deny being to CBS Lounge? I said, what night? Well, the night you killed her, of course, Mr. Crone. I mean, everything I said, he twisted and turned around. I'm telling you, when I came down off that witness stand as a 35-year-old man, I almost went over and laid down next to him. Next was my roommate. He was going through a divorce. He had children. Most of his money was going to take care of the child support. I always had a place for somebody to live, somebody to stay, somebody to visit. He got on the stand. He answered my attorney's questions, and then here come that prosecutor again. So you know Ray Crone a long time, haven't you? Yes, I have. It's been 12 years since we were in the Air Force together. And Ray Crone's always been a good friend. You've been here in times of need, times of trouble, looked out for you, even helped you. In fact, he's giving you a place to live right now, isn't he? Yes, that's right. That's the kind of guy Ray is. Then the prosecutor leaned over right in his face and said, and you'd lie for him, wouldn't you? And turned and walked away and sat down. Less than a minute's time, he told a man that raised his hand in that courtroom to swear to God to tell the truth, a man who raised his right hand to swear to protect this country and obey its laws, and that prosecutor in less than a minute's time called him a liar, told the jury to disregard him. Took the jury just 3.5 hours to find me guilty, convicted me of murder and kidnapping. They acquitted me of the sexual assault. I can't explain that. There's a lot of crazy stuff goes on in our justice system. But the prosecutor's whole story, his whole theory was I went there at closing time to help her close. She refused me sex, and I molested her, assaulted her, and then had to kill her to silence her. That was his story. That was his motive. That was his theory why I killed her. And they just acquitted me of sexual assault. Nevertheless, 4 months later, I'm before the judge. It was aggravating. The jury has been dismissed. And they have a little mini-trial called an aggravating mitigating hearing. First part, the aggravating part, is put on by the prosecution. Why this is above and beyond, so outrageous, so horrible, it merits the death penalty. They argued the bite mark was on her breast, gratuitous violence, excessive pain and suffering in that sensitive area. She was either alive and felt the pain or she was dead, and that's necrophilia, that's tampering with a dead body. It's just disgusting. It's heinous and depraved. The judge ruled that was an aggravating factor. You have to have at least one aggravating factor to get a death sentence. And then it's the defense's turn to put on the mitigating. Mitigating, as you may know, is to lessen, to soften, to ease. Some people say to make excuses even. Think about this. How do you mitigate something you didn't do? How do you show remorse or regret for an act you never committed? It's what they wanted me to do. I told them I got no remorse and I do it. My lawyer says, well, we'll put your family, your friends on. We'll have them come up here and tell them what a good person you are. I said, you're not getting my mom, my sister, my friends up there and be cross-examined by that prosecutor. No way. It's not going to happen. He said, well, you're going to have to tell the judge that. I did. I told him, Your Honor, I got nothing to mitigate. I didn't do it. You got the wrong person. I was promptly called an unremorseful killer, a monster, and sentenced to death. Spent the next 3 years in Arizona's death row. 6x8 cinder block cell, 3 walls, cinder blocks. Cement slab was my bed. Had a pad on it about 1.5 inches thick. I got 1 army blanket, 1 sheet, 1 towel. I wrapped my tennis shoes in my towel. That was my pillow at night. I only got out of that cell 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday was rec day. They would come to your cell, have you completely strip down everything off of you, lift and twist and bend and turn. Then you get dressed right there in front of that officer, stick your hands out through the hole in the door. They called it a trap, a little square hole about this big. Put me handcuffed there, turn around, there was a belt attached to that, would be fast behind your waist so you couldn't move your hands anymore in this. He motioned the officer outside the door to open up the cell door. I'd step out and turn away from the officer and freeze. They put an 18-inch chain around my ankles. He'd be joined by the other officer, and these 2 officers would escort me down the hall, outside into a 10-foot square cage, cement on a slab on the bottom, 10-foot high hurricane fencing all around it. And I'd be out there for 2 hours in the sun, outdoors, in fresh air. Maybe I'd see an airplane. Maybe I'd hear a car horn, a lawnmower engine, a dog bark, something remember me, that world they took me away from. And I'd beat myself up. Why me, Lord? What did I do to be in here? I read the Bible. Mom had sent it in to me from way back in Pennsylvania. And I found strength in the stories of like Job, the story of Jonah. Passages out of the darkness shall come to light. Rejoice in trials and tribulation, where you shall find favor in the sight of the Lord. And I found strength, and I knew I was innocent. God knew I was innocent, and my family believed in me. My friends believed in me. I was 35 years old. I'd established my reputation. And I realized I'm going to fight this system. I better know this system. I started reading law books, started going to the law library when they still had that. Meanwhile, my case was making it to the Arizona Supreme Court, direct appeal. And I have to say, thank God for my worthless attorney. He actually did something right. The day before the trial was to start, it was a Friday, actually the trial was to start Monday. The prosecutor had us in before the judge wanted to introduce this videotape, this old VHS, whatever those big tapes were, by a bite mark expert. About 45 minutes of his expertise of how under his latest techniques and technology and how he identified this bite mark and how it was perfectly matched to me. My attorney was actually awake, paying attention at the time. He objected, said, Your Honor, I've never seen this evidence. He said, you can't allow this in at the last minute. The judge said, denied. I'm going to allow this in. You can review it over the weekend. And in a burst of brilliance, probably never again recreated my attorney's career. He actually said, Your Honor, if you're going to allow that evidence in, I'm going to need 30 days to delay. I'm going to need a continuance for 30 days so I can review this. And again, the judge said, denied. We need to get this trial rolling. Just 7 months after the murder, I think got to get the trial rolling. But when the Arizona Supreme Court reviewed this, they recognized it for what it was. It was a violation of the rules of discovery. As a defendant, you have a right to know what evidence is going to be used against you, a right to receive that in a timely manner so you can prepare for that. They can't spring it on you at the final moments. They can't hide it from you. And the Arizona Supreme Court said that my attorney was well within his rights for asking 30 days. He said that the judge was wrong in not granting that. But just because there's a mistake, an omission, an error, doesn't mean you walk free or get to go home. You hear like technicalities and think they're free to go. No, that don't happen. There's a second part to this. It's called harmless error evaluation. This is where they review this evidence, this mistake, this omission, determine whether or not the jury would have even cared. Did it matter? The Arizona Supreme Court's exact words were, without this videotape, there wasn't even a jury submissible case against Mr. Crone. They recognized everything was about a bite mark, and they ordered a new trial. It was wonderful news for me and my family. But we also, during those 3 years, almost 3 years I was on death row, people were being executed. We knew the state of Arizona could and would kill you. And I can tell you, I knew some of the ones that were taken off. They take you off a week early, put you in isolation so you can't kill yourselves before they get the opportunity. They want to watch and be there, make sure you're going to be okay to be executed. Weren't none of them kicking and screaming. No, it's kill me, do me a favor. People die every day. You know what's hard is suffering every day. And weren't none of them afraid of dying. That's the only way to get out of the hell they was living. But my family recognized what could and would happen, and so they mortgaged their house, cashed in their retirement. Just blue-collar family. My family worked with collections from there. I went to school with kids that parents went to school with my parents. They donated their income tax returns, different money they gave to my family. We hired an attorney out of California. We didn't want anything to do with Arizona. A man had found out about my case. He was very well known, good with forensic science evidence and stuff, and he said, let me take the case, and we didn't have the money to pay. You need hundreds of thousands of dollars for a good defense. He said, just pay the cost. I believe in Ray. Let me do this. So he did. In comparison, that case started in February of 1996. In comparison, it was 7 weeks long. Over 500 exhibits. 3 bite mark experts testified for the defense. My folks came out from Pennsylvania, stayed in a friend's RV out back of their house for the whole trial. Some of my friends in Phoenix would get off work on different days for evidence. The local newspaper in York, Pennsylvania had a reporter there every day. And during that trial, at one point it came out that DNA from the bite mark that was supposed to have been DNA had actually been tested. And Dr. Blake in California we were able to get it to Dr. Blake, and he was able to clone it, to grow it to where he could actually test it. The DNA from the bite mark, the saliva from the bite mark that I'm supposed to make was not my DNA. Imagine how good that was for my family and friends sitting there in that courtroom that day. Yes, finally the truth came out. And I still didn't realize, it's a win at all costs game for prosecutors. That's how you climb your career ladder. You can go on to become attorney generals, governors, whatever, but you better get conviction in a death penalty case because that gets you recognition. At all costs, at any cost, get a conviction. And this was Arizona. This was Maricopa County's famous and best. He told that jury, closing arguments, the last person to talk to the jury before they go out to deliberate, before the judge instructed, he told that jury to disregard that DNA, ignore that DNA. Remember, this is 1996 now. It's new stuff. He told them that O.J.'s trial was actually just going on. He said, ignore that DNA. That's easy to explain. But you as a jurist are responsible to see that justice is done for him and her family. And we know who did it. He's sitting right here in the courtroom pointing to me. He said, that DNA is easy to explain. She's a waitress. She handles bottles and glasses all day long. That was just transferred there by accident from somebody else. Jury was out for 3.5 days. Came back and found me guilty again. Now, as bad as it was the first time, there was no preparation. I didn't think anything could happen to an innocent person. It did. I read the law books. We presented a case, and they just said guilty again. And I'm looking at the juror. Everything went into slow motion now. It's just little pictures. Everything's just flashing at me. There's the juror. They're crying. They're wiping the tears. The bailiff that was reading the verdict, his voice was breaking up. He couldn't hardly fit it. My attorney's hanging on my shoulder saying, oh, my God, Ray, why didn't they see the evidence? I don't understand. It's not over. I'm with you till the end. And I'm looking over at the prosecution and the victims' families, and they're jumping up and down, celebrating like won the big ball game. And all I could think is, whoa, back up, start over. No, this can't happen. And it all went so fast, just click, flashes. But then this horrible sound came to me, and that's when it brought me back to reality, because it was the sound of my mom and my little sister screaming behind me, crying and tears, yelling, turned around to see it in their face. Mom, it's okay. Amy, it's all right. I'll be okay. It's all right. They weren't just doing it to me. They were doing it to my family. 4 months later, again, I was before that judge. Again, it was the same story. Only this time when I told my attorney I got nothing to mitigate, he said, you let me handle this. You see, whatever your career is, whatever it is you do in life, do it to the best of your abilities. Don't take shortcuts, especially if somebody else's life and well-being is involved in it. He said, you let me handle this. For the next 2 hours, he went over all the pieces of evidence that came out during that trial. Why footprints in the kitchen where the murder weapon, a big butcher knife, was taken. Same footprints around the victim's body. They used a type of dust, a special light. Actually got perfect shoe prints. Went and bought the shoe to match them prints, a size 9.5 Converse. I wear a size 11. My bare foot was bigger than the whole shoe. My fingerprints, palm prints. In that bathroom where the knife was washed and clean, hidden underneath the trash can. Fingerprints all over the place in there. Palm prints did not match me. Hair and saliva on Kim's body did not match me. When my attorney was done, that judge said this case was going to haunt him for the rest of his life. He said it was hard for him to believe that somebody with my background had committed this crime. He said it was hard again to believe with some of the evidence that I didn't commit this crime. He said he had lingering residual doubt of my guilt. He said that outweighed the aggravating factor, and so he said, Mr. Cronin, I'm going to spare your life, and he sentenced me to 25 to life for the murder. Thank you very much. You're not sure I did it, so you gave me 25 to life for the murder. And then he added on 21 more for kidnapping. 46 years I was facing for something the judge wasn't sure about. 46 years minimum I was looking at. I was 35 years old. You add that together. Yeah, it was a death sentence. I wasn't going to be laid on a gurney, have a lethal cocktail shot in my veins for the name of the good people of the state of Arizona. But I wasn't going to live to be 81 years old. Not in our prisons. They are very violent. They are certainly run by gangs. Some of them even officers are in those gangs. But I wasn't going to live through that. The medical is horrible. These are people that get a job in there, or the ones that can't get insurance on the outside, can't have a private practice. That's the only ones that can get to work in the Department of Corrections. So it was a death sentence. Now if I went now to the walls, now I'm walking around on yards where it's every day it's on. These are the worst of the worst. Most people, believe me, most people belong in prison. But they also are going to get out one day, and we need to help them be a better person when they get out, not make them worse. That's what our prisons do. And years going by, my appeals got turned down. My family and friends are still standing by me. They're out there trying to hire an expert. Now it's almost 8 years going by, and we're trying to go get investigators to go look. And every now and then I get to think, man, ain't this something? I'm going to die in here for something I didn't do. Still reading my Bible with it under my pillow. And finally, in 2001, the Arizona State Legislature has recognized the validity, the importance of DNA. Most states, you're only allowed to bring up new evidence after a short period after your conviction. It's called post-conviction relief. Arizona and a lot of other states since the 90s have recognized DNA is an exception. It can clear somebody. It can identify the real perpetrator. And so Arizona passed a law in 2001 about new evidence. If you had DNA evidence that was previously untested, that was properly maintained, and could have direct bearing on guilt or innocence, you could petition the courts to do DNA testing. We found out that Kim's clothing that had been cut off for her had been saved, had been kept by the Phoenix Police Department. My attorney was able to go look at it. We had a suspicion that whoever had stabbed her so hard through her clothing, she had a couple shirts on, stabbed her so hard it actually bent the knife. A big butcher knife was bent. We figured, well, there's no guard on there. There's a good chance that person might have cut themselves during that attack. And so when they were able to, my attorney was able to go look at the clothing, found there was some kind of stains inside of her jeans, on her underwear. And under that new law, we requested that DNA testing. And the same prosecutor was there for the hearing. Your Honor, there's no reason for this testing. It's a wild goose chase. It's a fishing expedition. Mr. Crone's been convicted twice of a jury of his peers. Overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Your Honor. There's no need for this testing. We know who did this. Well, thank God, because that judge didn't see it that way. He said he ordered that DNA testing to be done. He ordered the recently accredited Phoenix Police Department's DNA crime lab to do that testing. And after all I've been through, that's the last people in the world I want to touch anything, because some of the biggest liars in my courtroom had a badge. But it also turned out to be a blessing for me. Again, it's funny things in life are like that. It was a blessing because police departments, law officers were the only people that had access to the nationwide DNA data bank. Just like fingerprints had been stored all around the country and accessible from any police department, DNA was now being stored. In Arizona at that time, anybody convicted of a murder or sexual assault was required to give a DNA sample. There was 15,000 just from Arizona alone. So when that lab technician extracted blood from the pants, from the underwear, it was the same blood, same DNA, compared it to me and it wasn't me, compared it to Kim, the victim, it wasn't her. And I say, you go, girl, because this overachiever decided to take that sample and put it in the DNA data bank. She wasn't required to by the judge's ruling, but she put it in that DNA data bank, and it spun and whirled or did whatever DNA data banks do. It came back with a match. Came back with a match to a man that was currently serving a 10-year sentence for having sexually assaulted a child just a few months after the murder. A man who at the time of the murder was paroled after doing about 4 years for sexually assaulting a woman, was paroled to his mom's house, who, guess what, was a few blocks away from the bar. I got a call on April 8th, 2002. Got called over to the counselor's office. I was in a yard at Yuma, Arizona at the time. I got called over to the counselor. I said, your attorney's on the phone. I said, hello. He said, Ray, how you doing today? I said, fine, just another day in paradise. And he laughed. He said, no, what are you hungry for? What do you want, steak, seafood, Mexican food, a beer? What would you like? I said, Alan, what the devil are you talking about? He said, I just got off the phone with the prosecutor's office. They just got back from the judge's chambers. They're cutting the paperwork. You're coming home today. What did you just say? He said, roll up, Ray. It's all over. You're coming home. I handed the phone back to the counselor in a daze, just stunned. And he looked up. He said, well, you know how them lawyers are. He knows someone hung up at the phone there. And I'm still trying to get up out of the chair, wondering what just happened here. And he answered the phone again. His phone rang. He said, yes, sir. Yeah, he's right here. Yeah, absolutely. Right away, I'll have it done. He hung up with a look on his face. He said, you're going home today. Go gather up your stuff. I need you to sign a release. 3 hours later, I walked out of that prison looking over my shoulder, wondering what the heck are they up to this time, because they ain't never tried this trick on me. I walked out of that cell, that prison that day to start my life all over again at the age of 45, reunite with my family, and also the distinction that day of being the 100th person in America to have been sentenced to death, later been exonerated. 100 mistakes have now been made in the United States. A lot of events went on around the country waiting for that milestone. I'm told they even lit up the Colosseum in Rome. They light it up whenever states abolish the death penalty also. But I stepped out of that prison that day, and there was a lot of media attention waiting for me. There they are. Well, what are you going to do? What was it like? How did you survive? All kind of questions being asked to me. And I talked about the support of my family and friends. I talked about how I read the Bible front to back 3.5 times in those 10 years. Slept with it under my pillow. And a man in the back, a reporter, raised his hand. He said, well, Mr. Crone, given your faith in God, how do you justify him leaving you in prison for 10 years? What? How do I justify God leaving me in prison for 10 years? How do you answer a deep soul-searching question like that? I just walked out. It's right there. The gates are right there. How do I explain God leaving me in prison for 10 years? I froze. The cameras, the microphones were all right there, right in front of me. And something shot in my head. I said, well, maybe it's not about those 10 years. Maybe it's what I have to do the next 10 years. And I've been able to travel and speak. I've been to a number of states now that have all abolished the death penalty. I've testified before Congress down in D.C. I've testified at both United Nations. I didn't ask for this. It was brought on me. And I never questioned death penalty before. It never affected me. I never thought it bothered. It didn't matter. But I hope from hearing what I said today, I hope that you can question the death penalty now. Thank you.
Told you it would be powerful, huh? Pretty incredible. Charlotta, I would like to invite up here to share her story next with us.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Just walking through the door, so had to teach a class, so wonderful to see you all, and nice to have this opportunity. I am Charlotta Evans, and I would like to speak tonight concerning the things that life has knocked on my door and kind of given me a unexpected welcome, like it or not, type of outcome. My name is Charlotta Evans. I will be I have all of these notes and reading off of this tonight, but I'm really one of those kind of speakers that just like to speak off the cuff. And so I will reference back to my notes from time to time, but just like to share my story with you. I am considered a native here in the state of Colorado, and pretty much been here probably for consider myself a native. I've been here for 45 years plus, so I consider myself a native, originally from Des Moines, Iowa. Hello, Shane. So pretty much what brings me here today is 23 years ago, over 23 years ago, I was finding myself just pretty much enjoying Christmas just like everyone else. And here we are, December 21st, 1995, taking my two sons and doing the things that mothers do on Christmas. Single mom, just enjoying things around the holiday. The Christmas Christmas Eve was my oldest son's birthday, and so he would be turning 6. So not only were we celebrating Christmas, we actually was doing his birthday as well. And so you're a beautiful audience, by the way. Yeah, took time out to come in this weather, and you look great. Yeah, so there I am, enjoying Christmas, and had relatives over, preparing meals, cooking cookies, doing the whole bit. And in the midst of all that, we received a phone call. And I said, this is December 21st, 1995. Received a phone call. And the phone call was from a niece that said, this is your niece calling. There was a shooting down here in the Park Hill area, and we came back to the house to get our things, but we really are in harm's way, and we need someone to come and get us. And so this was 2 o'clock Thursday, in dead of winter, 4 days before Christmas. And I'm saying to myself, what? So as me and my boys wake up from a nap, my oldest son was home early from school because he was sick at school. We woke up from a nap to that phone call, and we began to start our day. Well, as the night began to come, I figured I'd better get down to the Park Hill area and go get my niece and her daughter, 3 years old, same age as my Kason, and that I better get down there before dark. And so we all got in the car. One of my older cousins and another niece was in the car, and my 2 boys. And so this was 1995, so this was like the tail end of the time coined the summer of violence. And so this is what was taking place. A lot of gang activity, a lot of shooting happening in the Denver area, in the Park Hill area. And so not being really knowing about the gang activity, but I remembered the movie called Colors, and I wanted to make sure that I got down there down to Denver before it got dark, because I remembered that the gang members, when they shoot up homes, they come back. And so my whole purpose was to get down there, get my niece and her daughter, and get back to Aurora. And so that was my plan. Well, as things began to unwind, the night began to get a little later. And I said, well, let's all jump in the car, get down there, get them, and get back. Matter of fact, when I come down, I'll get all the kids that are in the house, and we'll come back and have the big party that we normally would have a couple days before Christmas for my oldest son, Calvin. So going down, we all hop in the car from Aurora, get down to Denver, circling the block. And as I circled the block, I wasn't so much familiar with the area because I grew up in Aurora. And so we pulled up right in front of this duplex. And as we pulled up in front of this duplex, it appeared to be a driveway, but it was all worn grass because it was snowed. So I pulled up right in front of this big picture window. So I go in, and my sons are still in the car, asleep, with my 21-year-old cousin in the front seat, and another niece is in the back seat with my boys. So I go in the house, and I go in, and to my surprise, it's like 5 young girls and about 10 little kids in there. And I'm like, wow, you sure there was a shooting here last night? You know, they seemed quite comfortable to me. So I said, show me where the bullet holes. So I walked up to the window, and she showed me, here's where a bullet went in here. It hit the blinds, it hit the ceiling. And I said, wow. So I get my niece, and I put the coat on her, and we step away from the window, and all of a sudden, shots begin to ring out. We hit the floor, and once the shots begin to ring out, not knowing how many, how long this would last, the first instinct was to hit the ground. So we get up. My cousin comes to the door. She calls me by my nickname, which is Bunny. Bunny, they shot up the car. And I'm saying, they shot up the house too. Everybody's checking themselves inside the house. We're okay. So when we get out to the car, I still got my 3-year-old niece in my hands. I run out to the car, and when I run out to the car, my 17-year-old niece that went down with us, she's in the back. Everybody appeared to be fine. At this time, we get to 2 blocks away from where the shooting actually happened. We drive off, and my niece, Makila's in the back, and she checks Calvin. Calvin, are you okay? He responds. She checks Kason. Kason, are you okay? He's not responding. She goes to pick him up. Then she begins to scream out, Kason's bleeding. As we're driving, I'm trying to think, Kason's bleeding. Where's the nearest hospital? I grew up in Aurora. I don't know where I am. I don't know where anything is at. I become blank. I become in shock almost, trying to figure out where are we. So we see some people out front in a house. I threw the car into park. My cousin was in such hysterics, she could not stop the car. I had to throw the car in park. When I threw the car in park, I got out. I grabbed my boy. We're walking, dead of winter, little guy. I'm holding him. He's still breathing. And I'm saying, you can make it, little guy. You can make it. And we're walking, and we go into these people's home. As we go into their home, my other niece comes in, calls 911, calls the church, calls the family. And I'm sitting there, and I'm holding Kason, and he's yet breathing. The time frame in which the paramedics came and the family came and everyone's outside, I don't know how long it took, but all of a sudden the paramedics came busting through the door. I'm holding Kason in my arms. Never did I think to do CPR. I could not discover where he was shot at. None of that took place. But I remember moving his tongue from side to side so that he could breathe. When the paramedics walked in, Kason took his last breath in my arms. I hand him to the paramedics. They laid him down. They put a tube in his mouth. And I always say his little body because he was such a little guy. And I just remember that, his little body laying down there on the ground. They put a tube in his mouth. And I said, are you going to revive him? And they were like, yes, we're going to try. They rush him out. When I looked down, I was covered in blood. I had no idea where it came from. And still, in my mind, I'm thinking they're going to revive him. He's going to live. After all, I gave my life to the Lord. After all, bad things don't happen to good people. We do these things to prevent these types of things from happening. And I had committed my life to the Lord like 3 years. And when God gave Kason to me, changed my life. And I committed my life back to the way I was brought up. And we were in church, and I kept my vow, and I went to church faithfully. And I taught classes, and I was doing missionary work, and I fed the homeless. But there I was. And I was saying, no way Kason's gone. That's out of the question. So they take him. First thought was, I got to get to Calvin. So I run outside, and I told them, give me something to cover up with. And so that covered up with a comforter they gave me. And I walk out. I get Calvin. And then my family's out there. So they all leave. They take myself. They take my niece who was in the car. They take my cousin that was in the car. We all go to the police station. And they knew something that I didn't know. And that was that they could not revive Kason. 2 hours later, they said, pronounce Kason dead on arrival. The night after getting questioned by the police for several hours, I left the police department, went to the hospital. There at the hospital, there was walls of family, church family and friends lined the wall. When they looked at me when I walked into the hospital, they were whispering at each other, does she know? Does she know? I couldn't for the life of me wonder, why were they looking at me like that? Wondering if I knew. So later to find out that I had a countenance on my face that showed a glow, that showed strength, as if I didn't know that Kason had passed. And my brother said to me, get to our sister. She's about to break down. I get her. I grabbed her, held her. She was shaking uncontrollably. She stopped instantly. When we all left the hospital, we all walked away hours later. I remember turning around and saying, who's going to stay here with Kason? That's how absent I was of the reality that he was gone. We all get to my mother's home. I wanted to get away from everybody. And the only place I could find was in the restroom. I went to the restroom and I sit there moaning in agony. Is this really real? Did this really happen? In the other room, I could hear my mother praying, saying, dispatch the angels and find out who took my baby's life. And I remember saying to myself, I don't even care who did it. Lord, did this really happen? And I found myself moaning in agony. All of a sudden, I felt a presence come into the bathroom with me. And I heard a voice on the inside and the outside of me. And that voice came in a suggestion and a question. Have you forgiven? And have you considered forgiving? And I said, God, is that you? What do you mean, forgive? Of course, yes, I'll forgive. And I sit there, taken back, because I had never heard such an audible voice. And I said, yes. So I leave the bathroom, and the reporters came that morning, which at that time it was the Rocky Mountain News. It wasn't the Denver Post. And they asked me, have they heard? You heard from anyone? Did anyone call the district attorneys? Have they said anything about who did this? And I said, no, I have not heard anything. My niece did not know anything, who it was. She knew nothing. We knew nothing. And I said, but the only thing I do know is that I have forgiven. And he says, what? I thought you said that no one had been called. No one, they don't know who it is. What do you mean you've forgiven? I said, I don't know what I mean. I just know that I said yes. So, in that, three days later, they apprehended 3 teenagers, 2 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old that went out, stole the cars, broke in homes, stole guns. The home that they broke into had a gun under the bed in a box, had never been used, with bullets, that was purchased in 1970. That gun that was used December 21st, 1995 at 6:30 p.m. is the bullet that entered my son's head, shattered his brainstem. And when he took his last breath in my arms that night, he was already gone. Here I am finding myself a mother, knowing that I had to be present for my surviving son. Single mom, a statistic. In the midst of all of this, by 2003, I knew I needed to find an outlet to stop my surviving son from gravitating to gang life, the same gang life that had led the 3 teenagers to make that choice that led to Kason's murder. I knew I had to do something if I wanted to prevent Calvin from spending the rest of his life possibly in prison. For 11 years, I worked and established a nonprofit organization in the Arapahoe County area, gang prevention, preventing violence before it occurs in the life of kids, and preventing bully and retaliation of shootings. They are the programs that are giving young people hope and supporting them to seek productive outlets and to keep themselves out of prison. These programs are suffering from lack of funding. These are the programs that are getting slashed so that our state budget can afford to seek the death penalty. These are the programs that get forgotten in the favor of salacious headlines about whether or not mass shooters and gang members deserve to be executed. In Colorado, truly, if Colorado truly cared, and I believe they do, and I believe we do, cared about the families of murder victims like mine, we would stop spending our time, energy, resources on these handful of cherry-picked cases. As I begin to find the healing, having committed myself to Calvin, my surviving son, and I started to think about those 3 boys that were in jail for killing my Kason, I had seen in my gang prevention work how children often make decisions without thinking through the consequences. As I learned how teenagers' brains still developing, especially the parts that affect judgment and impulse, and how the development also makes them more able to be rehabilitative, I realized I needed to meet them, both for myself and my son, also for my family and my community. Raymond Johnson was 16 when he shot my Kason, and we had our first restorative justice dialogue, March 2012. He was 33 years old. We began to talk about the harm that was caused to the community, to individuals, and namely to my family. At this time now, when I went to go and visit Raymond Johnson, being in a remorseful place, he was very repentive. He was willing to be accountable for the harm he caused within his confines. And we had that dialogue for 8 hours. I was the first in the state of Colorado to have a dialogue with their offender in the Department of Corrections in 2012. And we sit there and we walked away with closure. At this time, right now, I have taken on Raymond Johnson, the main shooter, as my son, to work with him and to be there for him, providing money on his books for us to be able to work through his process. And it's taken me all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to change the laws nationally for our kids that have been incarcerated for life sentencing. I will end with this. Unfortunately, I often think about my son Calvin and how his life took a different path as Raymond. Both suffered from trauma. My surviving son Calvin sat right next to his little brother. Unfortunately, it's not an uncommon experience for black and brown boys from Aurora We are fortunate that Calvin was able to get the help he needed. Many others, like Raymond, aren't fortunate enough to have had the help and the healing they deserve. And we know what that can lead to. The death penalty in Colorado is a stain on our history as one of the country's trendsetters here in the state of Colorado. Our reputation has suffered under the weight of it. We should focus our energy on the lives and hopes and the characters of our young people and address the root causes of violence rather than the pouring our resources into a system that only comes when it's too late and that distracts us from our values of life. Thank you for listening, and I'm Kayson's mom.
Thank you, Charlotta. What an honor it was to hear your story. Thank you for sharing with us. And I'd now like to have Shane Claiborne come up and talk with us.
Why don't we breathe in and not move too fast from what we just heard? So just take a minute to sit with that. I've been able to be with Miss Charlotta quite a few times, and she's a hero of mine. And Ray and I, we haven't been together yet, but we got a lot of mutual friends, and just found out he's in Tennessee. We might even be related. We don't know. But to stand next to both of these folks and talk about something that I think for some of us, there's a degree of privilege that comes in choosing which issues we care about, right? And which is more important. Is it the death penalty or abortion or gun violence or immigration? You get nailed with all these different things. But what is happening tonight, I think, is that we see that for some folks, the issues choose them. And they're speaking out of some incredible wounds that are now the source of healing for so many. The work that Charlotta and Ray are both doing. And for me, I'm here because I chose to be here to stand alongside folks like that. And for me, the issue of the death penalty is an extension of my love for life. I came to see that, to kind of have the audacity to say, hey, I believe that the creator of life cares about it, right? And abortion matters, but it's not the only pro-life issue. That any time a life is destroyed or squashed, like that matters to God. And as I began to look at the death penalty in particular, I saw some things that deeply disturbed me. And one of those is that the death penalty has survived in America, not in spite of Christians, but because of Christians. That literally, and I want to say, if you're here tonight and you haven't thought a lot about the death penalty, or if you find yourself leaning for the death penalty, I'm so glad that you're here. And that's why we're having a conversation. I spent as much of my life arguing for the death penalty as I have against it. In fact, I always had the Bible verses, and I've always been passionate, no matter whether I'm right or wrong, And so I'm so glad that we're able to have this conversation. And for me, I began to look at the death penalty, though, and I had all the scriptures that backed up my position in favor of the death penalty. But then there was just something that didn't feel right in my heart, and I kind of have had this journey of trying to reconcile my head and my heart. Maybe you've had a similar experience, and it's hearing stories that moved me into thinking more and more. And so I started looking at the death penalty and wrote the Executing Grace book, telling a lot of the stories that moved me. And I came to find out that not only, like my little home state of Tennessee, not only is it the Bible Belt, but it's also a part of the death belt. Literally, where executions are happening in America is where Christians are most concentrated. 85% of executions in the last 40 years have been in the Bible Belt. And so I wanted to go back and kind of look at some of the scriptures that I used, and because we're in this fine academic institution here that loves the Bible. So I want to talk a little bit about the Bible, and then we're going to have time to interact with what we've heard from Ray and Charlotte as well. But as I look at the Bible, I like how Bono, the great theologian, singer of U2, he says, the fact that the Bible is full of messed up people used to disturb me, but now I find it a great source of comfort. And what he began to point out is, like, if we have a problem with murderers, then you kind of start to see that the Bible's like kind of filled with them. We think about Moses. I learned, is a great hero of our faith, but in the book of Exodus, he kills someone. He's one of the first murderers in the Bible. And we, of course, have Cain and Abel. One of the inaugural sins is murder. You keep reading, but like God, the story of grace is kind of working through the cracks of all of our human sin. And it seems that at the end of the day, this is a redemption story. And I think of even like David, who I learned in Sunday school, a man after God's own heart. On good days, but like you read 2 chapters of the Old Testament, and David just rips through the 10 Commandments. I mean, he breaks every one of them in like 2 chapters, and he ends up committing adultery, or some would say it was rape, because he says that he looked at Bathsheba and wanted her, so he sent his men to get her. He raped Bathsheba and ended up, just continuing to unravel in his sin. He has her husband Uriah killed in the battlefield. Sometimes kings think they can get away with anything. I'll stop there. But anyway, he's in this pattern. And even when David did that to Bathsheba, the brother already had like 10 wives and half a dozen concubines. I mean, he had a problem. He was a womanizer, right? And he gets rebuked. He hears, from his friend Nathan. He goes on to repent of his sin and write, so many of the Psalms, the longest, book in the Bible. Many of them are written by this man David, who was a broken man. In fact, I love the first chapter of the New Testament where it's the family tree of Jesus, right? And it goes through, like, you kind of skip those sometimes because it's it gets a little redundant. Like, this is a son of, who was a son of, who was a son of. But if you look careful, it's awesome because in that little family tree, it gets to the David and Bathsheba thing, and it says, and then Solomon was born. And Solomon was the son of David, but his mother was Uriah's wife. It's like, don't forget, that was messed up what he did, right? Like, and yet, isn't it incredible that like even the family tree that led up to Jesus had this human sin and murder and adultery, and yet God's working through the cracks to continue the story of God's love and grace. And so, of course, we get to Jesus, and I think of Jesus as we hear the stories we've heard, and it seems so clear to me that a part of what happens in Jesus is God leaves all the comfort of heaven to join the suffering here on earth. That God enters this world as a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew coming from a town where people said nothing good comes from there, who was born in the midst of a genocide where Herod was trying to slaughter the little kids throughout the land. Like Jesus was born into the funk of the human condition, right? Born in a manger because there's no room in an inn. And then I think of one of the mothers in my neighborhood who lost her baby like Charletta, and she's weeping, and she starts to gather herself and she says, but there is a God who knows what it feels like to lose his own son. That part of the good news is that there is a God that knows what it feels like to be wrongfully convicted and sentenced to die, executed by the state, humiliated, naked on a cross. Like there is a God who knows what it feels like to be us. And so I think at the heart of the death penalty is one of the most important questions of our faith, which is, do we believe in redemption? Do we believe, what do we think Jesus did on the cross? Jesus absorbed all the violence of the world in order to triumph over it with love and redemption, dying with grace on his lips. That Jesus made a spectacle of death, not to glorify it, but to subvert it. Can somebody say amen? Like to subvert it, right? Jesus is like water poured on the electric chair to short circuit the system of death. And anytime we celebrate the death penalty, we undermine the very possibilities of redemption. We contradict the Christ who said, I've not come for the healthy but for the sick. The one who, while we all deserve death, loved us so much that we're given the gift of eternal life through Christ. So I think there's a lot at stake. So sometimes we interpret Jesus through the lens of the Old Testament rather than interpreting the Hebrew Scriptures in light of Jesus, right? And so, I went back and looked at some of those verses that I had used. And, for one of the most well-known verses in the entire world is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Right? This idea that was actually an ancient paradigm and philosophy of justice. Lex talionis. We got some scholars in the house, right? It's where we get the very notion of retaliation from. And it was a version of justice that allowed for reciprocal harm. That you could harm someone back, but only as much as they had harmed you. So it put a limit on how much you could retaliate. An eye for an eye. We might say an eye for an eye, no more. And we've come to kind of misconstrue that and use it as a license for revenge rather than a limitation of the harm that we might return to someone. And so, as we think of it, this eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, it was to stop the spiral of violence, right? So if you hurt me, I could, if you broke my arm, brother, I couldn't go break your arm, buckle your legs, and burn down your mom's house. I could only return as much harm as you had done to me. And yet, isn't it beautiful that Jesus says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you this, that as the fulfillment of the law, Jesus is going to come and show us the perfection of God, right? That, like, even now, we would think it's probably a little cruel, brother. If you poke my eye out, I'm not actually going to poke your eye out. Like, we can do better than mirroring the harm that you do. Like, if you broke my arm, we wouldn't go break your arm. We don't rape people who rape to show that rape is wrong. And yet, somehow, in the most extreme case of murder, we still hold out this philosophy that we can kill to show how wrong it is to kill. And yet we end up mirroring the very pain that we're trying to heal the world of. And so Jesus, as you've heard it said, you might have a right to poke somebody's eye out. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. I want to tell you another way to love you, and I want to show you what can heal the harm that's done without mirroring the harm that was done to you. And so I love Jesus. That's why my rabbi friends, my Jewish friends, they'd say, you know what? The wild thing is, like, we had the death penalty in the Hebrew Scripture, but the Jewish rabbis, they made it almost impossible to carry out an execution. There were over 40 specific criteria that had to be met in order to legally carry out an execution. He said, so yeah, we had laws that were important, but we never actually wanted to kill someone. The rabbis said if we kill one person in 70 years, 70 years, it's too many. And my rabbi friend says the irony is it's the Christians that misuse the Hebrew Scripture to justify the death penalty, and you guys have Jesus to reconcile with. Right? He's like, you've got the nagging problem with Jesus. So we've got Jesus, And just for the record, too, like, capital murder was not the only death-worthy crime in the Hebrew Scripture. Y'all know that, right? There were over 30 death-worthy crimes in the Scripture, one of which was working on the Sabbath day. I always say everybody but Chick-fil-A be in trouble on that one, in fact, I was at an event where one of the managers from Chick-fil-A was there. He gave me a bunch of coupons because I've told that joke so much. Anyway, like working on the Sabbath, sorcery, forms of sexual conduct were all worthy of death penalty. One of them was disobeying your parents. Some parents are saying amen. But like these were all death-worthy crimes, even in the United States, on the books. We had witchcraft, the Salem witch trials, where like legally we killed people for things other than murder. So no, not many people want to bring that biblical death penalty back, right? That are going like, no, if you're working on this. And yet, so as we look at Jesus, though, his most profound confrontation with the death penalty is when the woman is caught in adultery and dragged before the town, right? And the story starts in a heart-wrenching way. She's humiliated, and all these men are getting ready to kill her. They're armed, and arguably they had every legal right to do it. It was a death-worthy crime. But Jesus enters the scene, and he moves into the circle of armed men, and he bends down in the dirt, and he starts writing in the dirt. Scholars all speculate on what he was writing. Some people were saying maybe he wrote, where is the man? Because it takes two to tango, right? But maybe he was writing the names of the women these men slept. I don't know what he was writing. We asked the kids. My favorite answer was one of our kids goes, maybe Jesus was writing in the dirt. If this doesn't work, run, woman. That's my favorite one. But we don't know what he wrote in the dirt. But what he did next was stunning. He looks at all the men and he said, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. And then he'll look at all of them and at all of us and say, but remember, if you've looked at someone with lust in your eyes, you've committed adultery. If you've called someone a fool, you've already committed murder in your heart. Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. All the stones drop and the men walk away, and it ends awesome with Jesus and the woman. He goes, where'd they all go? The only one who had any right to throw a stone had absolutely no desire. The closer we are to God, the more grace we should have, the less we should want to throw stones at other people. And so it must break the heart of Jesus that in some ways on this issue, Christians have been one of the obstacles to life and to mercy and to the restorative justice that Charlotta lives and preaches so beautifully. We have a chance, I believe, to change that story. 80% of millennial Christians born after 1980 are against the death penalty, not in spite of their faith, but because of it. When asked as Americans, would Jesus be in favor of the death penalty, 95% of Americans said, no. We just got to convince the Christians to take him seriously, right? So it's an important conversation, and there's so much at stake. People's lives are at stake. But the integrity of our gospel is at stake. I just want to close by saying that this year, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I hope you'll respond to the things we've heard with It's a powerful night here. And for me, this year was a big year because it was the first time someone that I know well was executed. I didn't know quite what it would do to me, but I've had a chance in Tennessee to get to know a lot of the guys on death row. I kind of have a unique opportunity. I can go and I can meet with a dozen of the guys. I can stay 2 or 3 hours. I have a lot of freedom, and so I've gotten to know them really well. And one of those guys was facing execution, and there was a new governor that was came into being, into office, and he's in Bible study with Michael W. Smith. He's a really deeply committed Christian, so we're praying for him. And this execution rolled around of a man named Don Johnson. And 30 years ago, I believe Don is guilty of what he was convicted of, a horrific crime. He was convicted of killing his wife. And his daughter, who was traumatized by all of this, was one of the biggest champions of the death penalty. She says, I want the freak to fry, talking about her dad. Over years, though, the Spirit moved. I got to know his daughter. I got to know him. She said, after decades, I hated him, and I wanted him to die. But I began to realize that the hatred wasn't hurting him. It was hurting me. In fact, it was just tearing me up from the inside. I knew that the only way forward had to be different. She began a relationship with her estranged father after 30 years. And they began it was hard, they began to heal some of those wounds. And then the execution came around. And the governor decided to execute Don Johnson. And I remember being with him just 3 days before he was executed. And I said, how you doing, man? And he said, I'm too blessed to be stressed. He said, I'm praying for the governor. I'm praying, for all of you. And that night he prayed for all of us and all of you, that we would have strength to continue to be a voice for mercy and grace and for alternatives to the death penalty. And then as they started the ritual of death, I mean, it is a ritual, right? Where they put him in the solitary and they began to, give him his last meal. And Don said he had $19 allotted for his last meal. And he said, listen, I want to fast. And I'd like the $19 to be donated to a homeless mission in Nashville to go to the folks on the street. Fasted his last meal, and then he said, I want my last words to be singing praises to Jesus, if that's possible. And so he as he went to his execution, his last words actually that he was given, he said, I want to ask for forgiveness from everybody that I've hurt, and I've hurt a lot of people. And he said, and I want to extend forgiveness to the folks who are getting ready to execute me. And then he said, Warden, if it's all right, I'd like to sing. And he sang, soon and very soon, I'm going to see the King. There's no more dying there. There's no more crying there. I'm going to see the King. Those were the last words he sang. And while I'm proud of the redemption story that Don Johnson is, I'm ashamed of my state. I'm ashamed that we couldn't do more, right, to try to stop that. And that's why we're here, right? We're here because we believe in grace. We believe in redemption. We believe in challenging a system that is so unredemptive. There's one other guy that I've gotten to know in Tennessee that is facing execution just 3 days before Easter this year. His name's Abu Ali. He's a really great singer. And we're praying that his execution will be interrupted. Found Jesus there, and he's been singing Amazing Grace. So I thought to kind of ground us for the conversation, we got a little recording of Abu singing Amazing Grace. So I'll close my thoughts with his words.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch
Amen.